France has always been a great power in Europe, especially compared to Britain. Far from the European continent, France is blessed. So France has always been the Western system, the most restless force, but also to break the Western system of firm power. It is because of this, so the United States has been suppressing France. For this, in fact, many people are asking, France will withdraw from NATO again? The United States in Europe most dislike France, because France not only disobedient, but also with the United States against, and France often gives the United States a problem. Now the European Union, the Euro or France took the lead to get out, become the heart of the United States. France also continue to promote, to engage in the European army. The United States is sleepless, so the contradiction with France is great. When President Roosevelt was the most disliked France's Charles de Gaulle, that Charles de Gaulle is too ambitious, and ultimately so. So soon after World War II, France drove out the U.S. military and withdrew from NATO. Although France rejoined, the conflict remains large and irreconcilable as of now. In terms of France's purpose, it is to become the boss of Europe and dominate Europe. So it necessarily wants to build a more united and tighter Europe. From the interests of the United States, the more divided Europe, the better, the more fragmented the better. The United States to benefit, firmly control Europe, maintain hegemony. So the strategic interests of France and the United States that is the natural opposition. It is because of this, the United States continue to suppress France, this time the Australian submarine incident. The most injured is France, French companies lost hundreds of billions. For this France immediately recalled the ambassador to the United States. So you can see how deep the contradiction between the two countries, and this contradiction will be more difficult to contain. Because on the one hand, the United States continues to weaken, especially the power owned by the smaller and smaller. The more you need to rely on allies of autonomous power continues to grow. On the other hand, after Britain's exit from the European Union, France, as a permanent member of the European continent, and the strongest military countries in the continent, so the position in Europe continues to strengthen, and France and Germany continue to complement each other, unite with each other, and gradually dominate the development of Europe itself. This makes the contradiction between France and the United States white hot. The United States must strike France. France must defend itself. So the future is bound to end up in France for their own interests, and constantly play with the United States. And the biggest killer will be to withdraw from NATO and re-establish the European army. Once the European army is established, the US forces gradually exit Europe, France can win. Recently the French foreign minister revealed that Macron may officially visit China in April, and this visit to China has long been traced. From the G20 summit, the French side has been preparing to visit China. Not only that, from the perspective of recent relations between France and China, Macron's visit to China is basically a nail in the coffin. With the Russian-Ukrainian conflict in a stalemate, European countries found that following the United States not only cannot share the soup, will be constantly sucked blood. This also forces European countries must find another way out. After German Chancellor Scholz visited China, France also handed out an olive branch to China. With Europe's two leaders have publicly expressed their willingness to visit China. Now the United States want to continue to use Europe to contain China is not so easy. Therefore, in my opinion, Macron's visit to China has these two purposes. First, at the economic level, although France is an ally of the United States, but from a long-term perspective, cooperation with China is far more than confrontation with China, gaining more benefits. Cooperation with China is the general trend. This is something that not only Germany can see clearly, but France can also see clearly. For France itself, the first step to achieve real independence is to keep developing. The global economy is gradually shifting to Asia, so want to develop quickly. France naturally cannot avoid China this express train. In addition, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has not yet stopped signs. France in the face of this bottomless pit to fill, the economy is much more important than the political position. Secondly, at the political level, Macron wants to use this visit to China to put pressure on the Biden administration. As we all know, the Biden administration promulgated the Inflation Relief Act in an attempt to attract a large number of European companies to choose the United States through preferential subsidy policies, bottomless harvest of quality European enterprises, which also destroyed the overall industrial structure of Europe from within. The blow to the European economy is huge. The two sides even once broke out a trade war. So when the game between China and the US is intensifying, the intention of choosing to visit China is to remind the US not to suck the blood of Europe while tying up European countries to curb China. The United States frequently interferes in the internal affairs of other countries and stirs up relations between countries at the international level, which has caused dissatisfaction among many over countries. Chinese youth website news. The French left-wing party Prosperity chief Luc Mélenchon made an important speech at the press conference, claiming, France, even if it withdraws from NATO, it does not have to be an enemy of the United States as well as Western countries. It is understood that Mélenchon clearly stated in an interview that France should find the main way to change the problems it is facing now. He also stressed that France's withdrawal from the EU is mainly to alleviate the problems that France is facing now, but it does not mean that France is an enemy of the United States. Mélenchon re-emphasized that France has a positive opinion about its withdrawal, and it is likely that France will agree with Russia, and the United States has not fulfilled its commitment not to expand to Russia, so France is opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. Mélenchon also said, if France withdraws from NATO, it will avoid the Cold War thinking of the United States and Russia and China. It is worth mentioning that Mélenchon, in his alliance with Russia, also attaches great importance to the relationship between China and France. In fact, in 2022 Mélenchon has publicly stated his refusal to join the United States in targeting China. He also called on the United States to abandon the military race with China. The outbreak of the Russian conflict and the sanctions imposed on Russia by Europe following the United States. In fact, the biggest beneficiary is the United States. The outbreak of the war, the resurrection of NATO, which Macron declared brain dead, and the continuation of US domination in Europe became a fact. In addition, the US urged Europe to impose an energy embargo on Russia, successfully pushing Russian energy suppliers out of the European market and clearing the biggest obstacle for the US energy giant to occupy the European market. Therefore, from an economic and strategic point of view, the United States actually became the biggest winner of this war in Ukraine. In contrast, Europe followed the US in provoking the Russian conflict and imposing sanctions on Russia, but ultimately became one of the biggest losers in this mixed Western war against Russia. As a result, Europe has to bear not only the inflation caused by the increase in energy prices, but also the huge security risk of a widespread war and a nuclear war in the Ukrainian conflict. Therefore, from the economic and security point of view, Europe is one of the biggest losers in this hybrid war. It is possible that, under the manipulation of the United States, Europe could become, as some analysts say, one of the poorest regions of the world. As the Russian conflict continues indefinitely, the idea of stopping aid to the US military and withdrawing from NATO is gradually becoming the dominant voice in French public opinion. In addition to many French opposition leaders repeatedly calling for withdrawal from NATO and dialogue with Russia, French President Emmanuel Macron's stance on US relations and Ukraine also seems to be changing. According to a reference news, Macron recently said that Europe needs to take a firmer position internally, reduce its security dependence on the United States and develop self-defense capabilities to ensure peace and stability in areas affected by the Russian conflict.